Hey everyone and welcome back. Now in today's video we'll be discussing about the prepared query in Consul. Now prepared queries are objects that are defined at a data center level. So once created, prepared queries can then be invoked by application to perform the query and get the latest results. So this can be better explained with the diagram here, where on the left hand side you have a client and on the right hand side you have the prepared query. So a client makes a request on a specific path which is app.query.consul. Now, depending upon the contents of this specific prepared query, the IP address associated with the latest app A service will be returned back. Now, one of the question that comes is, since we have already been doing service discovery and it is working perfectly fine, why do you want to add an additional prepared query just to get the IP address of the service here? So let's discuss things in more detail. So the first use case here is associated with multiple version. So let's assume that there are multiple versions of app A. You have version 1 and you have version 2. Now within the prepared query, we can explicitly specify a version that needs to be returned to the client. So in this prepared query, if you see, you have a data which states reference to the version 2 of this app A. So now if the client makes a DNS request based on this prepared query, what will happen is that the resultant output, in this case it is the IP address, will be associated with the application that is based on version 2. So tomorrow let's assume that there are some issues with the version 2 and you want the users to go ahead and reference to the service which is working based on version 1. So all you have to do is inside the prepared query, you have to change the reference from version 2 to version 1. The endpoint remains to be the same. There is no configuration that is required at a client side. Everything can be done at a prepared query level. Second big advantage is associated with the failover policy. So you can contact other data centers once there are no healthy instance within the local data center. So let's say that you have a prepared query in an Indian data center and a client is making a DNS request for app A. Now due to some reason, the app A related services in India data center is not working. So there are some issues with the Consul client and things are not working here. So prepared query can go ahead and forward it to the Singapore data center where the app A is running, and it can fetch the details of this specific service and send the result back to the client. So in this case, what will happen is, even though one data center is facing issue related to a specific service, a prepared query has the capability to fetch the latest IPs of the service from a different data center and send it back to the application, so that application can communicate with the service that is part of a different data center and things continue to function. So these are the two important use cases for prepared queries. Let's have a quick demo, post which we'll be discussing things in more detail. So currently I have two Consul servers that are running. One is associated with the India data center name and second is associated with the Singapore data center name, and both the servers are joined together. So here you can see both India and Singapore. Now within the India data center, you have a service of web and there are two versions that are available. You have version 1 and version 2. Similarly, for the Singapore data center, you have one service called as database that is running over here. So discussing about the use case where there are multiple versions that are available and your prepared query can go ahead and reference to a specific version at a given amount of time. So within the CLI, I have a prepared query that is available. So if you look into the prepared query here, the name of this prepared query is web service, and here we are linking it to a service called as web and the tag version is 2. So just to reiterate, for the service of web here, there are two versions. You have version 1 and version 2. So if you see, the version 1 is associated with the port of 8080. The version 2 is associated with the port of 9080. Now, if you do a dig, let's specify the port of 8600. And if you want to refer to a specific version, then you can specify the tag. In this case, you have version 1. So here you see, this is the tag version 1 followed by the name of the service which is web .service.console. So this will go ahead and give you the IP. Let's make a SRV record to verify. Here the SRV record says 8080, similar to what we see. In case if you want to refer to version 2, it is referencing to 9080 and the same can be seen over here. So now the client will always have to find out what is the latest version. So tomorrow there can be a version 3. So you do not really want to change the client configuration from version 1 to version 2, version 2 to version 3 and so on. So client configuration needs to remain static. You can create an endpoint like prepared query. So within the prepared query, you can give the latest reference to whatever version that is available. All that client has to do is they have to query a specific endpoint. Now, for the service, the endpoint is service.console. However, for the prepared query, the endpoint is query.console. So, in this specific prepared query, the name of the prepared query is web-service. So, we'll use the same dig command. Let's call it as web-service. And instead of service.console, we'll have to specify query.console. And you see automatically this time it is directing to the port 9080, primarily because within our prepared query we have specified the tag version 2, which in turn is associated with the port 9080. So this is one sample use case where prepared query can be useful. Second use case where we were discussing, if a service is not really running in one data center, prepared query has the capability to forward a request to a different data center altogether. So let me show you an example. So I have a file called as failover.json. The name of this prepared query is failover-query and it is associated with the database service. And you also have a section of failover that basically means that if it cannot find a specific database service in the local data center, then it can fail over to the data center of Singapore. It can try to look for the service in the Singapore data center. Now, as we have already seen that there is no database service in this specific data center of India. And since we are running a command here, the prepared query will automatically detect that the database service is not present here and it will fail over and search for the database service in the Singapore DC. After it finds the database service in Singapore DC, it will send back its IP address and the associated port back to the client. So let's try it out. So now if you go ahead and run a dig here, you should see that it is referencing to a different IP address this time, which is 165.22 and the port is 5080. So here you see it is 165.22 associated with the Singapore DC and the port associated with this service is 5080. That's great. So I hope at a high level overview you understood the basics of prepared query. Now in the upcoming videos we'll go ahead and practically implement both the use case 1 and the use case 2 so that we have a better understanding on how things work.